Donald Trump keeps fueling the fire with his defiant attitude towards all things Latino. In his last press conference in Iowa, he had a verbal exchange with Jorge Ramos, the most influential Latino journalist in the country, and an outspoken critic of anti-immigration policy. Granted, Jorge Ramos jumped the queue of the reporters and asked him directly about immigration. Trump, the ever-polite toupee-wearing GOP nightmare, decided that it was not worthy of an answer and kicked him out of the room, only to let him back in a few minutes later to engage in a brief debate. Donald Trump defended his decision to toss the Univision and Fusion news anchor out of the press conference. In his latest fight with a U.S. television personality, he said, "I'm not a bully," in an NBC interview, Margaret. Jorge Ramos has been one of the most outspoken critics of Donald Trump from the top when he started putting this narrative out against the Latinos. Jorge Ramos actually reached out on a paper note, handwritten note, asking for an interview with his phone number. What did Donald Trump did? Snap a picture and put his phone on Twitter for everyone to watch. So this is not new. They had already bad blood before that. But Trump is against journalists in the right and journalists in the left. What's up with Trump?
Well, you said something really brilliant in the intro where the man jumped the queue. So it wasn't his turn to speak. He was speaking out of turn. And I know sometimes in that press position, you're really heated. You want to get a response. I'm wondering, would the outcome have been different if he had waited his turn to ask the question? Do we know of anybody else in that room who had jumped that queue like this man did? Or was he the only one?
No, he was the only one. But I like that you asked me that question because when the Republican debate happened, everybody was celebrating the lack of political correctness that Trump showed. And the moment that a Latino journalist does the same thing, everybody comes against it and everybody claims that you need to be politically correct. So there's definitely a double discourse in the media. Most of the mainstream media, to your point, was covering that part of the story, that he jumped the queue. What I like to cover is the fact that the socially divisive platform that Donald Trump is offering, and specifically the question was, why are you selling the empty promise of deporting 11 million people when it's not viable? Why are you selling the empty promise of taking away birth rights to this country?
Birth citizen, right, birth or
You're
citizenship.
Right. When he can't. So he was confronting him with the viability of this main point of his campaign. Just to give the audience an idea, to do this, to deport 11 million people from this country, that will be an effort 100 times bigger than the encampment of Japanese citizens that happened here after the World War. Right. So that is the level of task that he's claiming to do. And Jorge Ramos was just pointing out something that he wouldn't be answering. And I think the problem comes not from jumping the queue, but from asking the question.
Right, well this is interesting because I am of the belief that there is a war on journalists in this country, especially those asking really independent questions. Gone are the days of Helen Thomas, by the way. I just want to throw that out there. I really miss Helen Thomas. I wish that there would be another one of her surfacing soon. But more importantly, back to my point, the DOD, they just released this memo, this declassified memo that called journalists belligerents, what do they say, underprivileged belligerents, and that branches of the U.S. military could treat them as such, could punish them. And they defined this by saying that a journalist would be considered belligerent if they were caught sympathizing or cooperating with the enemy. Now, the fourth estate, it's our job, it's your job and it's my job to question those in power, to question their policy. So does that make you a belligerent? Does that make you somebody who's undesirable, who's worthy of being punished? Because the fourth estate, we have very protected rights to be able to ask questions, but at the end of the day, we're civilians just like everyone else. So my question is, was perhaps this man treated as a belligerent, or was he just, you know, a journalist not waiting his turn and was thrown out? I mean, I don't know.
I think it's a journalist that didn't wait his turn because he's sick and tired of this issue just being used on the right to incite hate speech and not really talking about a viable policy to solve the immigration problem that this country has. Now, what is happening with this speech that Donald Trump is giving out about immigration? Now we have his very first big endorsement from the former KKK Grand Wizard David Duke, that in his radio show came out saying that Donald Trump is the best candidate. So when you get the support of this divisive, socially full of hatred group, you go into very, very weird territory. And before we leave, I just want to leave you guys with a quote, a poem, if you will, from Martin Niemöller. Martin Niemöller was a prominent Protestant priest, a pastor in Germany during the Nazi occupation, and he was very critical of Hitler, and he wrote this, and I want you to listen to it. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one else to speak for me. So I want to hear your comments below, and please subscribe to the Lib TV.